All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Ochi, and I am Deputy Managing Attorney at Public Advocates. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the demand letter that we are going to send to the governor and various state officials immediately after this press conference, demanding that they address the enormous wealth disparities that exist in California's school facility funding program. A demand letter is a threat to file a lawsuit if legal violations are not corrected. Here, we are urging California leadership to immediately rectify its discriminatory system of funding school facility modernization in advance of a multi-billion-dollar state bond measure that is expected to be on the ballot in November. Today, you will hear from complainants across the state and other storytellers who are impacted by California's discriminatory funding system, which leaves students, educators, and families in unequal, outdated, unsuitable, and in many cases, unsafe facilities. If you are pressed and have questions, please put your name, outlet, and questions in the chat. First, we will hear from lead attorney John Affelt, who is the managing attorney for the Education Equity Team at Public Advocates.
Good morning. And just to clarify, Nicole, that's put their name and outlet and questions in the chat or in the Q&A?
In the chat or the Q&A, whatever is most convenient for you,
Okay.
or whatever you can see.
Perfect, thanks. Good morning. In the 1970s, the Serrano v. Priest case brought by Public Advocates successfully ended the practice of allowing educational opportunity to turn largely on wildly disparate local property tax revenues. The California Supreme Court ruled that such wealth-based discrimination was unconstitutional. The reform ordered in Serrano has led to more equalized statewide funding of day-to-day school operations, including through the present-day local control funding formula. Unfortunately, the unequal capital funding side of the state's public school system has never been addressed. Capital funding for schools in California remains mired in a 19th century landed gentry mindset, where those who have more get more. Our demand letter focuses on the program for upgrading and modernizing school facilities, which is both the area of the state's greatest current need and its most inequitable scheme. The modernization scheme has two principal flaws. First, it requires all districts, no matter how low their assessed property values or how great their need, to raise 40% of capital costs through local bonds based on local property values. Second, it provides a 60% match to all comers. In essence, a 150% multiplier of whatever the local district contributes. High wealth districts who come to the table with much bigger plates walk away with an exponentially larger slice of the state pie. The discriminatory design of the state's facility funding system is no accident. It has been intentionally baked into the system, and its disparate results are wholly foreseeable. Lower wealth districts have received nearly 60% less in state modernization funding than higher wealth districts since 1988. Study after study has acknowledged the open secret here. Some districts get to build swimming pools and performing arts centers, while others suffer through leaky roofs and black mold. Low wealth districts exist for any variety of reasons in California, all outside the control of the individual affected student. Whether the low wealth derives from the geography of untaxed tribal lands in Del Norte, or from historic redlining and freeway construction in Linwood, this kind of discriminatory system has no place in California in the 21st century. The pending legislative proposals only nibble at the margins by adding a few percentage points to the match for the lowest wealth districts. Instead, a thorough, equitable overhaul of modernization funding is needed, along the lines of how Serrano reformed operations funding. The current local control funding formula system, for example, utilizes an inversely proportional sliding scale to distribute state LCFF dollars. The more funds raised through local property taxes for operational needs, the fewer state LCFF dollars are sent to a district and vice versa. A similar sliding scale approach is needed to render California's capital funding system finally constitutional. In addition, as the state auditor has called for, the state will need to reform its first come, first served application rules, which greatly benefit larger, better staffed, and wealthier districts who are able to advance their projects earlier. A just system will need to be much more attuned to ensuring the small, the rural, the poor, and the needy district can equally provide clean, safe, modern facilities in good repair to all students. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Next, we will hear from Bree Fraley, a Del Norte Unified School District parent, citizen of Tolowa Dene Nation, and True North Organizing Network parent leader. Del Norte is a rural, county-wide school district and is the northernmost county in California. Bree, please share with us how the lack of school facility funding is impacting your children and your community in Del Norte.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone for inviting me to be here to share my truth and my story of my community in the most northern, rural, poor, desperate, small community that I call home. Delaha, Shahushi, Briannan, Huete Tret Fraley, Shi, Yantaket Dani. When I was hearing John speak, the truth of the matter, we don't realize those things. We just often have to settle and live with what we have. And I just want to thank you all for bringing us together to address some of these things, because there are so many inequities. And I want to share my story about how that impacts my family, my future, my children, our community, and actually the state of California's future and our collective well-being. I want to start with the motto of the school district, small but mighty school district, one district for the entire county. The school district motto is to be safe, responsible, and respectable. And the inequitable funding of state facilities is a barrier to our safety and well-being of our children and community. We can't even live up to our school motto that we promote and share on a daily basis as our children enter our school doors. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Del Norte County. I'm a citizen of the Tolowa Dene Nation, as Nicole introduced me, meaning that I have chosen to live here in my community and hometown. And actually, it's more than a choice. It's a responsibility that I have to my people and my community, to my culture, in order for us to hold on to any remnants we have left of Indigenous people from this place. Assimilation, and actually the school district itself has imposed rules and requirements that restrict us from being who we are as Indigenous people. And this plays into the facilities, the curriculum, the ability to bring in teachers, to have the resources that we need to have a prolific, robust education for our community. We have the highest Native population in all of the state, with over 7% of the student population being Native American, my children being 4 of those. I'm a mom of 4 students, 3 in elementary school and 1 in the middle school. There's only 1 middle school district-wide. But I want to talk about my children's experience and advocate for their experience in the Del Norte County school systems. And so right now my children go to Pine Grove Elementary School, which is one of 4 of the K through 5 schools. There's one middle school, Crescent Elk Middle School, 6th through 8th grade, and then one countywide main high school, Del Norte High School. A number of years ago, when my now 13-year-old son was at Pine Grove School, he suffered a major accident on the playground, which resulted us having to go to the emergency room and endure traumatic events where needles were jabbed in his face. He was profusely bleeding, and it required stitches to sew up his face from the dilapidated facilities that are not maintained because of the inequitable funding. And so I really appreciate us all coming together to talk about this demand letter, because it's had physical impacts on my family and also an expense to me. The emergency room bills were in the thousands of dollars, and I am now been sent to debt collectors because I can't pay those bills because of the inadequate and inequitable funding that we're talking about today. So that was one example of trauma that was a result of the inequitable funding that is the current situation and landscape that we're facing in a rural community. And then I'll come to present day. Just a couple weeks ago, I decided to take my family to a community event in a different school district. We traveled an hour and a half south to Humboldt County, and we participated in a community evening event where there was a puppet shadow show. And when we got to the school grounds, we walked in, and it was this beautiful school field, and my boys just started darting and running towards the field, and they were so excited, and they said, "Mom, can we go to school here?" And I was like, "Why, honey?" They said, "Because they have a field and we can play in it." And it just broke my heart that I'm contemplating, taking my kids on a commute an hour and a half south just so that they can have accessible facilities. The school that I'm talking about, Pine Grove, and many other schools, the fields, we can't even play in the fields. The students are told you cannot go in the fields because it's not safe. And so they're limited to the blacktop. Right now we have caution tape around all the play facilities because they're not safe. And then also one other thing, so that's the outside infrastructure. We're not even talking about going into some of the things that John was mentioning around the black mold. And so we don't have adequate facilities, classroom sizes. And so there's this, era of bringing in modulars. Well, these modulars are not designed for our temperate rainforest. So I forgot to mention, if you haven't been to Delaware County, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world with, being in this temperate climate. But the statewide funding and allocation results in us having to bring in these modulars that were built for Southern California and not meant for us. And we are constantly having to use our facility resources to try to eradicate black mold that is rotting the school system. And so those are some of the things that were impacted by in my life. It's coming at an expense to my children, our well-being, and our financial expenses to the inequities in this statewide funding. And so my ask today is to, hear us and take us seriously to the effect that it's not fair, it's harmful, and I would love to have my children be able to live up to the motto of safe, responsible, and respectful. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Bree. That was really powerful. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Gary Hardy Jr., a lifelong resident of Linwood, located in LA County, an alumni of Linwood High School who now has his own child attending school in the district, and a current school board member. Gary, please tell us about your community in Linwood and the impact of school facilities on your education and that of your child and constituents.
Thank you, Nicole, and good morning to everyone. Thank you all for being here. As was stated, I'm born and raised in Linwood, California. I went through Linwood schools from preschool to high school. So I've seen firsthand the condition of our facilities as a student, and now how the privilege of serving on our school board in our 10th year in office, seeking to address the issues that I saw as a student in our schools that now persist today. Linwood is a vibrant community that is very culturally rich, but sits within an area that was strategically underinvested and under-resourced, and also was subject to a longstanding practice of bifurcating or dividing Black and Brown communities with highways, and subjecting us to lower assessed property values, but also environmental challenges. So with this in mind, as we are here in Black History Month, seeking to sort of address some of the longstanding inequitable issues we see around policies across the nation and in the state, school facilities funding is top of mind for me. Also, as a person who has studied land use, redlining, and the Federal Highway Administration's placement of freeways, this issue could not be more important to me. As a parent, you know, you want the best for your students. And as going to school here, as a young person, I saw dilapidated buildings, I saw old classrooms, I saw crumbling infrastructure. We were hit heavily with flooding and electrical issues. And I first ran for the board to address the issues that I saw as a student. And now when I got on the board, I understood clearly what the barriers were in addressing those issues. A lot of it has to do with our ability to access the funding, to wage the proper capital campaigns, to get a bond of the appropriate amount to address the issue, but more so it was the inequitable way schools facilities are funded in general. So I was happy to join this effort to call on the state to create a more equitable practice for facilities funding, because too often the misnomer is that school districts have enough money to do everything because we have LCFF and LCAP. But that is far from the truth, especially in communities like Linwood, where we are trying to do things that just keep the lights on, for lack of better terms. When we would love to build, as I mentioned earlier, a pool or a performing arts center or a STEM lab, but having to address schools that are built in the 1920s or 1920s infrastructure has been what we've been relegated to, and it has a great deal to do with the need to address the systemic racism that we experience with redlining in the Federal Highway Administration. So as a parent, as a former student, and as a board member, it is our clarion call to get this right, to inject some equity and justice. Our model in Linwood is equity, access, justice, right? And we have not solved the equity, access, and justice with respect to our facilities needs because of our inability to do so. Not because we don't care, not because we don't work hard, not because we don't fight each and every day for our young people, but we are up against policies that prevent us from doing the best we can do for our community. And even as the current proposal is, where communities need to have a matching fund, that is not the answer for Linwood, where we've been already well taxed above our what is fair. And we are a community that's 80% cost burden with other costs. So as a board member, it is irresponsible for me to consider another bond for our community that's already severely cost burden. So with that in mind, I'm calling on the state, joining in this effort to make sure that the process that's in place is truly equitable, that it meets the need where the need is, and that it also addresses the long-standing policies that stood in the way of true equity and justice in communities like Linwood, filled with Black and Brown children who have tremendous promise and potential that is often hampered by facilities that are not up to par. And leaders like myself in the community that are doing our best to make sure we have resources in the community that provides quality education for young people, but are sort of hampered and tripped up by these longstanding, really racist policies that under-resources and under-invested in Black and Brown communities that subjected us to lower assessed property values, and also the environmental challenges that go with living at the footprint of two freeways that are not serving our community. They're serving communities that are going through our community, but we're bearing the brunt of that. So I'm calling on the state to do the right thing by young people and by kids across the state and addressing this inequitable facilities funding issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary, for sharing your story and the story of your community. Next, we'll hear from Goodwin Procter, who has been the superintendent of Linwood Unified School District for the last 7 years. Superintendent Goodwin, can you please share how the lack of school facility funding has created disparities between your district and others?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity. As someone who has worked in public education for nearly 30 years, primarily in historically underserved communities, I can tell you firsthand that there is an urgent need to fundamentally change how public school facilities are funded. As you already heard from Dr. Hardy, in our district, we constantly find ourselves caught in a cycle of reacting to numerous facility needs, primarily centered around safety and basic repairs. This week alone, we had about 40 classrooms that were leaking due to the rains. And last year, it was a different 60 classrooms. Despite saying that we are preparing our children for the jobs of tomorrow, the sad reality is that we are stuck in the facilities of yesteryear. While other districts are modernizing labs and performing arts theaters, the reality in Linwood and communities like Linwood is, for example, we had to demolish our only major auditorium in the city, the only place where a kid got a chance to be on stage because the 100-year-old building was beyond repair. We instead find ourselves burdened with outdated furniture and the stark reality that our classrooms resemble those of the 1950s. Despite collaborative efforts with our community and passing multiple bond measures, we have even requested a state waiver to exceed our bond capacity. It's never enough. And what does this mean? This means that our families who are already struggling to put food on the table are asked to bear an additional burden for basic facility needs and repairs. While other schools were utilizing ESSER funds to provide direct services for students such as mental health care and tutoring, we were compelled to allocate half of our ESSER funds for things like HVAC. Without a comfortable learning environment, how can we expect our students to focus on their education? It's time for our state to recognize the urgent need to reform how schools are funded for facilities. Let's reimagine a place where all kids, regardless of where they live and attend schools, truly have the facilities that they deserve. Investing in their learning environment is an investment in the future for our community and, as Bree said, for the entire state. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Superintendent Goodwin. So we started at the far north of the state. We went down south to Linwood. Now we're going to the Central Coast. And you will hear from Dr. Summer Prather-Smith, the Director of Engagement and School Climate at Santa Rita Union School District. Summer, can you share with us how the lack of adequate facilities impacts your district's ability to provide student and family support services?
Good morning, and thank you, Nicole, and thank you to all the previous speakers. We echo everything shared here in the Santa Rita Union School District. I also come to this space as an alumni of the school district, both as a student and a parent that I continue to serve in here today. As Nicole shared, I am the Director of Engagement and School Climate for the Santa Rita Union School District, and I'm here to speak to you today on the dire need for adequate school facilities funding to provide the essential services for our students and our communities. We live in a time where the holistic, academic, social, and emotional well-being of our students must be prioritized. State and federal funds have been allocated to support staffing in these vital areas. However, we are met with the reality that without appropriate facilities, providing these services becomes an ethical and logistical challenge. Consider for a moment the impact of environment on student well-being. Our schools should be safe spaces where students feel supported and empowered to thrive. Without sufficient facilities, we struggle to offer preventative services to our students and our community, which we know they so desperately need. With an enrollment of just over 3,000 students, Santa Rita Union School District has over 700 identified McKinney-Vento homeless students and 75% of our families qualifying for free lunch. We know that before learning can happen for all students, but especially our vulnerable populations, we must ensure their basic needs are met. Our schools already face the challenge of providing required classroom spaces, let alone additional spaces for students and families to receive physical and mental health supports, health services, behavioral support services, alternatives to suspension and expulsion, family resource centers that offer community partnerships, basic needs support, parent education, ESL, and so much more. As a district, we have seen an increase in staff turnover and the inability to fill positions due to our lack of adequate facility spaces. No professional should have to work or student have to learn out of a storage closet turned classroom. We want to increase access to mental health supports for our students, but lack the confidential spaces for counseling sessions to take place. We lack the ability to hire additional staff due to our lack of ability to provide them an appropriate space to provide those services. We know that our families want more parenting classes and opportunities for adult learning, but our facilities are already stretched beyond their capacity. We have community groups asking to come in and provide services that our community deserves and wellness services that our community needs. But we have to turn them away because there is not a physical space for us to offer them. With a shortage of facilities and a lack of adequate funding to expand school facilities, centering student wellness is becoming increasingly more difficult. It is imperative that we recognize the interconnectedness of adequate facilities and educational success. We cannot expect our communities to flourish if they lack access to essential services. We must prioritize the well-being of our students and community to ensure that we have spaces they need to thrive. To adequately address the diverse needs of our student population and create environments conducive to their overall well-being, it is vital that there be an allocation of sufficient funding for school facilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Summer. That was really eye-opening. Next, we're going to move from Monterey County and the Central Coast to the IE, to the Inland Valley or Inland Empire. And we're going to hear from Angel Orozco, who graduated last year from San Gorgonio High School, which is located in San Bernardino City Unified School District. And he is a youth leader with ICUC, which is a faith-based grassroots nonprofit community organization that works with students across San Bernardino City. Angel, can you tell us about your experience as a student and how school facilities impacted your educational experience?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Angel Orozco. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a youth leader with Inland Congregations United for Change, ICUC. I graduated San Gorgonio High School in San Bernardino City Unified School District in 2023. I'm here today because the lack of equitable funding for facilities and modernization of schools I grew up in had a major impact in the day-to-day quality of education. And while I already graduated, I currently have one sister in high school and one sister in elementary school. From my freshman year until graduation, there's always seemed to be a problem with the AC system. During the summers, that would sometimes reach temperatures of 115 degrees. The AC would not always work. When this happened, it was almost impossible to focus on schoolwork due to the uncomfortable temperatures in the classroom. At times, it was so warm that sweating inside the classroom was possible. At the high school I attended, I remember there only being one lab room for the entire school. Teachers would have to make plans and with a very busy lab schedule. If a teacher is doing lesson plans in there is no space for others to share. Some teachers end up choosing not to have not to use the lab in their lesson plans. This causes exposure to lab-based work to be very limited. Throughout my years in high school, I have heard many of my peers talk about how the buildings in our schools are so outdated and have hallways that resemble hospitals or jails. Unfortunately, a majority of the classrooms have no windows, and the only source of natural light is from the skylight. I believe that if my school received the funding it needs for building new facilities or modernizing existing ones, I and others will not have this experience of these types of things. My school district tries to do as much as they can with the funding they receive, but what they do receive isn't nearly enough or equitable at all. I urge our state to do the right thing and make sure funding more equitable for all students across the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Angel, about your experience. That's such a powerful voice that we need to hear. And so now we're going to go from the IE and we're going to go back up north to Siskiyou County, and we're going to hear from John Ray, who is the superintendent principal at Weed Union Elementary School District, which sits at the base of Mount Shasta. John, can you share with us the challenges of building and modernizing school facilities in rural areas and the difficulty of the state's financial hardship program?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for everyone for joining us, for giving us a platform to be heard. I agree with all of the panelists. I'm going to talk a little bit about the high costs of doing business in a rural area. Again, my name is John. I'm proud superintendent of Weed Union Elementary School District. And in my previous experience, I also had the privilege of serving the Hupa, the Karuk, and the Yurok nations over in Humboldt and Trinity counties. both very rural school districts. And both, as panelists have described, I would even use the word deplorable conditions of school districts that were built in the 30s and 40s that unfortunately haven't had a chance to be maintained and no longer meet the needs. Hit with severe black mold, leaks, as well as seismic and structural complications where our kids were being served. To rebuild in a rural area, it actually has a significantly higher cost. These areas aren't located in the populous area where you would have certified contractors. And when I say certified, meaning can do DSA work and also be on DIR to do the prevailing wage that is required to do public works projects. So these contractors must come from out of town. And when you come from out of town, because of the requirements of prevailing wage and meeting some of the union requirements, the contractors get paid for what we call windshield time. They get paid for the travel time. So in an 8-hour workday, these contractors will drive at least 1 hour one way to come meet the needs in a rural. So we pay them prevailing wage to be in the windshield time. They'll give us 6 hours worth of work and then turn around and drive an hour home. So those costs right there are already 25% higher because I'm getting only about a 75% of the workday involved with it and paying 100% of the cost. In addition, you can consider the shipping costs and everything associated with getting those materials to there is significantly higher. The state has a system that they bump up the increase for small rural of about 5%, but that does not match the actual costs that we experience in rural and doing the construction here. As Dr. Hardy was saying, and as Bree was saying, in some of the areas that we serve, with lower socioeconomic status, and that's the populations that I'm serving. There is a mechanism within the state called a financial hardship, where the state will help you and pick up that matching cost. As John was saying earlier, there's a 60-40 and a modernization, 60 on the state side, 40 on the community side. And in a new construction, it's a 50-50. And then if you qualify for a financial hardship, and the way they define a financial hardship is that you're 60%, the districts contributed 60% of their bonding capacity, you qualify for a financial hardship, where the state picks up both sides. But when Dr. Hardy said a systemic racial inequity, I'm going to give you the data to actually back the systemic problem that we're faced with, because I am serving communities of color. And the system has it that in this financial hardship, number one, the bonding capacity, I can't pass a bond. Most of the community I serve are renters. So the homeowners would vote for the bond, but they're going to pass that cost along to the renters, which increases the rent, which my families can't afford. So that isn't a possibility for us. So we have to look at issuing what's called a certificate of participation, a COP, or quite simply a mortgage on a public project. So that money, or that 60% of that bonding equity, comes out of my general fund for the next 30 years. And that equates to 2 teachers, 4 instructional assistants, a bus. That cost that's coming out of the general funds that's meant for day-to-day operations is coming out of the facility just so we can meet those needs. But in addition to that, the state's going to allocate you money based on, as John alluded earlier, an archaic system of a formula of how many students you are currently serving. And that formula doesn't match like the class size reduction that we're required to do in the K-3. It's actually more of a 27-to-1 ratio. So the formula doesn't match necessarily what we're required to implement in our schools. But when you receive that amount, because your financial hardship, if your construction costs exceed the allocation, then the state comes in and says, wait a second, you went over what we allocated you. Therefore, the money that you contributed because you went over what we did, you have to pay us back as a state. So therefore, if they allocated me, say, $10 million for a project, and the project actually cost $12 million, we came up with somehow magically another $2 million. The state says, I need my $2 million back. Therefore, it cost me $4 million. So the system says you cannot go above there. We cannot build an actual adequate school facility on the allocation that has been given to us. And the state admits this. We're not going to give you what it costs. Our project is not based on the actual costs that you're facing. It's a formula driven. So therefore, the system says in this racially diverse community that is socioeconomically poor, you cannot build a better system or a better school facility, or otherwise the penalties are too high for you. So the proof is actually there that it is a systemic racial inequity. For me, what we're trying to do is to meet those needs, to build a facility that actually can serve it, is we've tried to be creative. So I actually serve as the general contractor for our particular district that we're required to rebuild. Now that will save us close to about 10% of the actual cost in the scope, but I didn't go to school to be a general contractor. They don't teach you how to be a general contractor in principal school. And so the impact for me is I don't get to spend as much time in the classroom or with kids. I'm out coordinating and I'm responsible for general conditions. So we just had, like you guys know, 4 inches of rain over the past week. I got to go figure out how to get those contractors back onto the site instead of in the classroom to serve my students' needs. But I don't get more money for that. We can't use any of these costs for administrative, any of the money from the state for facility for any administrative costs. So we've got this increased workload with no increased revenue system. So the system is broken. And I agree with the panelists. And I, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing, all of your insight into the problems with the current program. It's really helpful to hear all of your experiences. And then our last speaker will be Neil Chatterjee, who is partner at our pro bono law firm, Goodwin Procter LLP.
Great, thanks, Nicole. On behalf of Goodwin Procter, I just want to say that we are really, really proud to help drive for greater educational equality with public advocates. We've been working with you for a while. We've worked with you all on other matters, and you are really a world-class organization. We've also had the opportunity to talk to some of the people that you've heard from today, and our team has been really inspired by the stories and just the basic facts of educational inequality in California. We have a large team of attorneys who have been dedicated to this cause. You'll see it in the letter that we are going to be issuing later on today. And we're really looking forward to effecting positive change in California. My take on all of this is a little bit different than maybe what you've heard in the individual stories. I'm a kid of public education here in California. My mom was a public school teacher and a school administrator for about 35 years. And it always kind of surprised me that California has ranked for a long time at or near the bottom quartile of states in the country in terms of pre-K to 12 education. But at the same time that you rank in the bottom quartile, we also have some of the best public schools in the country on an individual basis. And most of those top-ranking schools are in affluent communities, not the communities you're hearing about today. And the reason for this difference is very, very simple. There's educational inequality in the California educational system due to a broken educational finance system. And I think John Ray gave incredible statistics that demonstrate why that is true. Through our demand letter, what we're hoping to do is to bring change, to increase educational equality for everyone, to improve opportunities for kids that are in racially diverse and lower socioeconomic communities, and to improve outcomes throughout California. We want California to be ranking much higher in the states than other states in pre-K to 12 education. And the way to do it is by causing the types of change we're advocating for here. Thank you all for having us here today. And we love public advocates.
Thank you so much, Neil. And just a big shout out to your team. I know I was getting emails from them like middle of the night. So thank you so much for all of your work, Goodwin, the big Goodwin team that we appreciate and love. So Thank you again to all of our speakers from across the state for joining us and sharing your experiences so vulnerably and honestly.